Taoiseach, today before the High Court is a young couple, Alan Murphy and Kellie Gilsenan. They're not before the court because they committed a heinous crime. They're before the court because they're homeless. And the reason they're homeless is because of the decisions of your government. Because your government has shown the same disregard to people on rent supplement in particular, facing massive hikes in rent, the same disregard that you've shown to lone parents. Alan suffers from serious epilepsy. He was in Tallaght Hospital in a coma and had to quit his job. Kellie is now his full-time carer. They are two of the nicest people that you could meet. Their previous landlord sold their house, so they were forced to move out. And, like many others, they did everything they could to find somewhere else to go. But they simply could not find a landlord which would accept rent supplement and which they could afford. Without any suitable accommodation offered by South Dublin County Council, they were forced to sleep in a tent, again, like others. Then they decided to bring the problem to the council's door, sleeping in their offices overnight a couple of weeks ago. The council then went to the High Court to seek an injunction to force them out of their offices. Is this what we've come to, Taoiseach? Do you stand over a situation where councils are going to the High Court to get injunctions against homeless people because they don't have sufficient emergency accommodation for them? Since a court case a week and a half ago, they've been sleeping in a tent in Sean Walsh Park, and then they've been in different emergency accommodation. The conditions in the emergency accommodation are horrific. The first place they were in, the entrance, was blocked with rubbish, the mattresses were covered in urine, and mould was growing on the windows. In the next place, there was vomit and food on the floor and unwashed mattresses. Alan and Kellie are not criminals. They're simply homeless as a result of decisions made not by them but by others. But they're treated like criminals. They're in a situation where Alan described yesterday to me like an open prison, with curfews, with no cooking facilities, with no individual freedom. And they're not alone. There's 3,000 people in similar situations, 1,000 of them children. And the Taoiseach is responsible for a significant part of this problem by refusing to increase the rent supplement caps while refusing to introduce rent controls. Will she now review this decision? Meanwhile, there's an €18.5 million hole in the Dublin City's budget for homeless services. Will the government commit to fill that hole? Will the government investigate the conditions in emergency accommodation and commit to improve them? And finally, will the Taoiseach look at the housing activists who have taken matters into their own hand, who have taken over a hostel owned by Dublin City Council and just left there on Bolton Street, have refurbished it and are opening it up to house homeless people? If they can do it, with no resources, with only volunteers to go with hundreds of empty NAMA properties around the state in South Dublin, for example, why can't the state take the same action to provide emergency accommodation and to provide social and affordable housing?
Thank you, Deputy. Taoiseach.
Well, first of all, in relation to Alan and Kellie, the first thing I would say is that if you have been advising them as constituents, as a TD, that I would strongly suggest that you ask them to get in touch directly with the Community Welfare Service in the area. That has been the consistent advice now, Deputy Murphy, to people in housing difficulties, to actually go and talk with the Community Welfare Service, who have complete discretion in relation to the issue of the amount of rent that may be paid. And as you probably know, there have been, at this point in time, well over 1,000 cases actually dealt with by the Community Welfare Service. 1,200 of those are in the Dublin local authorities, and another 700 or 800 are around the rest of the country. Now, the point about that, and I'm surprised if you've been dealing with the case, that, and I would hope you might advise the couple to actually contact the Community Welfare Service, because in addition, in the year so far, in the year so far, in this 6 months, there have been also 6,000 renegotiated or new rent supplement tenancies. Not the bulk of those, obviously, in Dublin. Now, it's not actually the best resource to, in fact, to actually go homeless. It is much better to deal with the community welfare service and to see if a property can be accessed that will suit their needs. As I said, Deputy, we've done this now so far this year in relation to 6,000 or so cases, and specifically in relation to people under threat of homelessness for the reasons that the Deputy outlined. We have done it in specifically about 1,200 cases in the Dublin local authorities. I've met recently with Simon, with Threshold and with other housing bodies, and all have agreed that the protocol is actually working well. So I would strongly recommend the protocol to the Deputy and to Alan and Kellie as a way of perhaps assisting them. I don't know what their precise requirements are, as Alan, as you said, has been ill. It sounds like they probably need a specific provision. In relation to the overall provision for homelessness, the government has actually provided, and Minister Alan Kellie has provided, 55.5 million in exchequer funding for homeless services managed by housing authorities and overseen by Minister Kellie's department. Well, there's actually a huge, you know, 6,000 families now or individuals getting housed through rent supplement in the first 6 months of this year is a very significant number. 2,000 protocol arrangements being reached to prevent homelessness and renegotiate tenancy arrangements for families at risk of losing is again significant, and the community welfare service is available to assist with cases, as is Threshold, as are a number of the other housing organisations.
Thank you,
you also make a reference to the issue of the local authority. And I think you were referring there to Dublin City closing up a premises that is usable for homeless people. I think the practice by local authorities, and Minister Kellie has discussed this on many occasions, of closing up and voiding premises that become vacant is seriously wrong. We have given very significant funding to open up all of those voided property, and right around the country as well there's been significant funding been given to open up estates which have been unfinished in different parts, including in Tipperary, Deputy, in different parts of the country, because we need to get every available house, every available apartment back into becoming available for people who have a housing need.
Thank you.
In the meantime, then, as you know, we have given the largest capital funding for a housing programme, including social housing, that has ever been seen in this state.
Deputy Paul Murphy for a supplementary question. Sorry, could we have order for Deputy Paul Murphy?
Yeah, the government has made more announcements about housing and house building and social housing and everything else than perhaps any other government in the history of the state. But also, since the records are available from the Department of the Environment, it is the government that has built the least number of social housing. Local authority social housing, the least. Every single year has been less than any other year in record. That is the truth, and you can announce all the houses that you want. But in terms of actually building houses, local authority houses, to get people off the housing waiting list, 8,500 currently on South Dublin, where Alan and Kellie are, that's the only issue that will fundamentally deal with it, and the government is doing absolutely nothing about it apart from making announcements. In terms of Alan and Kellie's particular case, and in terms of the 3,000 other people, the Taoiseach gives advice that she recommends that people don't go homeless. We recommend to people that they don't go homeless. People recommend to themselves that they don't go homeless. People do not want to be homeless. They don't end up in this situation lightly. They don't end up without having made contact with the community welfare officer, without trying to do whatever they possibly can. But where a landlord is selling a property, they're out. And then they're looking for somewhere else to go, and they don't find anywhere else. And right now, so Alan and Kellie are in contact with the council on a daily basis at the moment. And right now, the advice that's been given, so they currently have emergency accommodation because other people were cleared off the list. That homeless list will now fill up again. But the advice they're getting is not that they're going to get a house, but it's their advice to go and find a landlord that'll take HAP. But they can't find a landlord who will take a housing assistance payment. And they're not the only ones. I mean, Simon Community released a study about a month ago saying that they did a survey and found that only 12% of available properties were available within rent supplement or HAP limits.
Thank you, Deputy.
Landlords refuse to take it. So this issue is going to explode because people like Alan and Kellie, people who have opened up the Bolt hostel, they're not willing to just wait for more and more announcements and no houses to actually deal with this situation. More and more people will take this into their own hands. How many people are going to be injuncted from staying in councils if they bring it to the council's doorsteps, which is their immediate interaction with their housing problem? Or other housing activists are going to take over other NAMA buildings, open them up and bring people in. And the question and the crime is that the state is not doing that. That the state has empty properties, 12% of hotels in the state, controlled by NAMA, and the state doesn't open it up, deal with the crisis now, and then build homes to deal with our long-term housing and homelessness crisis.
Thank you, Deputy. Taoiseach, to conclude.
Yeah, the suggestion I made to you in order to help Alan and Kellie, and I feel terribly sorry, as I'm sure everybody does, for anybody who finds themselves in that situation, consequent upon the crash in construction, in banking, and everything else that we've worked to get ourselves away from over the last 4 years. What I said to you, Deputy Murphy, and you carefully avoided answering, was that in the case of somebody like Alan and Kellie, whom you indicated had been on rent supplement, that we are helping people on a case-by-case, individual family, individual person basis through the community welfare service. Now, what you carefully avoided answering was whether or not you're prepared to actually, well, organisations like Threshold and Simon are using the structures of the Community Welfare Service. You've asked for flexibility in relation to rent supplement. The way to do that is to do it on a case-by-case basis, which is through the Community Welfare Service. And I'm just suggesting that if you maybe have another conversation with Alan and Kellie and see if they have approached, I don't know from your answer, and if the Community Welfare Service can be of assistance. What would also be helpful as well is if you would give the details of who the couple are, and we can try and find out to what extent they can be assisted, because there are many rent supplements actually being negotiated, Deputy. We have the figures on that. I've told you the figures, and we've also negotiated, as I said, about 1,200 cases where people were at risk of losing their home for some of the reasons that you described, which is deeply, well, 1,200 people's cases being addressed is actually a very significant number. And what you need to do as well is to get...
Deputy Ellis. Sorry, Deputy, will you have order, please?
Yes, and the reason is that this country, under a previous government, made a decision to stop building social housing, and this government has begun the process of building social housing. This government has begun the process of building. This process.
Sorry, Deputy, it's the leader's questions now, please.
process of building social housing. And if we want to get a solution, the solution is to build more houses, to get more houses. And that's what that's why the government has allocated £3.5 billion of funding to do this. But it would be helpful if the deputies in the opposition who have members on the various local authorities would get their members on the local authorities to cooperate in actually getting the social housing programme underway, to cooperate in getting the voids reopened, and to cooperate in actually using the substantial amount of funding that's been made available to the local authorities.
Thank you, Taoiseach. That concludes leaders' questions. Now, shortly, we're going on